And we're back with another episode of Before You Buy, that show where we give you some straight-up gameplay and our first impressions of the latest games releasing. We're getting into the fall season, and it's crazy. There are so many games coming out. There's so much to talk about. We're grinding over here and losing sleep, and today we're talking about The Surge 2. This is the follow-up to The Surge, a game from 2017 that was kind of a nice surprise. I mean, it had some issues, but I really enjoyed the first Surge game. It also shares the name of a delicious soda. Now, before we get into it, this footage captures the early hours of the game, so it has no spoilers if you do care about that stuff, and this is the PC version, just so you know. But I think the best thing about the Surge 2 is that it's more Surge. It's a bit more refined, it's got a lot of new stuff packed into it, and I think most of it hits the mark. It's got a few misses, though, that I'm not quite sure about, but I'll get to that. The biggest thing here, and the best thing, is the combat, which is absolutely still great. The Surge is a deliberate action combat RPG with 2 attack buttons, a block, a parry, and a dodge, as well as some fun other robot twists. It's the type of game where it's challenging, and if you don't pay attention, a standard enemy can just wreck you immediately. You go on runs, you gather and grind for souls, tech scrap, and you hop into a med bay, and then you upgrade your robotic exoskeleton and weapons. That's really the loop. It's how it was in the Surge originally, and that remains the same for the Surge 2, and it's absolutely fun and addictive. What makes the formula great, I think, is the limb system. Target your attacks to different body parts of your enemies and build up enough energy during the fight, and you expend your battery energy to use a finishing move to not only just awesomely kill a dude, but also sever a certain limb, giving you the ability to get and craft that part or weapon onto your character. Now, I'm kind of paraphrasing, I'm kind of glossing over it, but it is just so satisfying to not only grind through enemies to level up your character for health and stamina and stuff like that, but also just to directly get cooler stuff and not only become more powerful, but just look like a damn cool robot man in the process. Not only that, you have chips to equip that you can essentially give more passive or active abilities and attributes. All of this has to, of course, balance out your power limit, which is limited by your level. So it's a balancing act of choosing the right equipment for the job, and it works just as well here as it did in the original Surge, just with a bit more to it. Now, the combat is fun and challenging. Now, they've changed up the block parry this time around. Now it's more directional based. It took a little bit more time for me to get the timing right that I'm actually kind of embarrassed to admit it. But you can also equip a chip to have a kind of visual indicator for it. Also, I gotta give a shout out just to the limb severing finishers. We've kind of debated here in the office whether or not the animations get old after a while, but I'm on the side of loving them so much and just not getting tired of them. There's more to them than in the original Surge game, and even more camera shifts to it. I just want to point out how impressive it is in a game like this that during a finishing animation, the camera can completely shift around cinematically and seamlessly so many times during one attack. I just think that that type of cool work needs to be commended, because when it all comes together here and it works perfect, and when the camera isn't stuck on a wall, it's amazing. Sometimes it's just the little things like this, and I want to point them out. I seriously always use the finishers and target different limbs just to see the unique animations for each weapon, even if I'm not focused on grinding out a specific body part. It's that much fun. And now, one of the big things I noticed almost right away between this and the original Surge is the massively improved amount of stuff you're picking up. There's a lot more going on in terms of weapons here, and it makes all the difference. Even in the early hours, I was overwhelmed with the amount of cool stuff I was picking up and the differences between them. You can equip and quickly swap stuff with a button press, so it helps you, essentially you have different loadouts as you're fighting different types of enemies, so you're going to want to switch it up. Which, fighting enemies, that's another thing I really liked here. The amount of enemy types really feels freshened up. It might be because there are so many different types of weapons, melee and otherwise, as well as armor and shield varieties, but it gave the game a very good pacing. Too many games of this style are bogged down in the early areas just because you're grinding and killing the same old things in the environment because you're still suck and underleveled. But here, it really helps here that there's always a bunch of different types of dudes and robots around. The early hours throws a little bit less boss battle action at you than the first, I think, so it's a tiny bit more accessible. And so far, the bosses have at least felt a little less for lack of a better phrase, bullshit compared to the original games. But the scenarios and the encounters are really satisfying. Now, one thing that I'm not a fan of in this game, and this is extremely up to personal taste, of course, but it's the lore and the story stuff. The original Surge kept things simple. It was a bit spooky, a bit mysterious and vague, and for a large portion of the game, it kept the plot and storytelling very simple and relied on a lot of environmental story stuff and stuff you just kind of had to go out of your way and seek out. For a game like this, sometimes I think less is more, and I loved it for that. Now, here in the Surge 2, there is way more, like, legit lore. There's a nanovirus taking over a city. You wake up from a coma. The city is in an awful collapsing state, and there are factions of all sorts of people. A police force, cults, rebels, crazies. And that comes with a lot of talking. A lot, at least for this type of game. Like, there's a lot of NPCs talking lots of exposition and giving you side quests and smaller objectives. It's just a lot more going on. I don't hate more objectives and optional stuff, but I just couldn't really get into the characters or the world they're trying to build here. I found all of the characters, even though a lot of them looked really cool, they were kind of forgettable. Surge 1 to Surge 2 went from 0 to 60 in terms of like trying to up the ante and make things a really big deal. I just think it kind of stumbled over itself, and it just didn't really work for me in terms of like motivating me to play through it. Thankfully, like I've been saying though, the combat and the encounters and the RPG stuff, that's what kept me interested, and it did. But that stuff, the story stuff, that's up to every individual player. You might like the lore and the expanded world and the story here. I just generally enjoyed the vibe of the first Surge game overall much more. Now, there also is a character creator this time, nicely enough, and you even pick like an RPG-style backstory for your character. Are you an ex-construction worker? Are you this? Are you that? But it doesn't really matter at all, and the game didn't take advantage of it whatsoever. I think it like popped up in like random dialogue that was meaningless a couple times, but it just seems like it just felt like it was all thrown in there just to make people happy, Thankfully though, what I do like with the story and the setting change is the actual game's environments. They feel even more twisty and turny and multi-layered. Where the first game was sort of a big factory and a facility, all the areas felt very, very different. And here's a big city, but all of the districts also feel very different, and I like that. Granted, it's all an urban setting, but like with that, you get some new unique twists on that formula, and I like discovering it. And also, there's like a nature preserve section that changes it up even more and feels way more varied. It's very like, I don't want to say out of place, but it's just different in a good way. Generally, I just really like the intricacies of paths, hidden stuff, and just the loop of unlocking shortcuts in all of these environments. I thought it was a strength in the last game, and it really continues here. Basically, I'd say the Surge 2 is like the same formula, but with a lot more added on, and I think it's pretty much all for the better. It's more Surge, and I mean that not in a bad way at all. I mean that as a compliment. I'd say, like, if you are a fan of the first one, definitely check this one out. It's worth your time, even though it, like, misses its footing here and there. Playing it is the best. But I'd say if you are interested here, you should absolutely go back and play the first one first and get it for cheap, because it's really cool, and it was underrated. And I think the Surge 2 might end up the same way, but we'll have to wait and see. I have been playing a review copy. These are my thoughts so far. And of course, this is a before you buy. You know how this works by now. I gave you some pros, some cons, and some personal opinion thrown in there. And now I definitely want to hear yours down in the comments. How did you feel about the first Surge game? Were you as head over heels as we were over here? Now that it's released, does it satisfy you what you wanted from a sequel? Is it not enough? Are you still just starting out? What's your favorite weapon? Like, what's your whole favorite, like, suit weapon combination? I want to hear anything you guys have to say about the Surge 2 down in the comments. Let's talk down there. If you enjoyed this video, though, and maybe learned something, clicking the like button is the best way you can help us out. We'd really appreciate that. And if you're new, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell, because we put out videos every single day. But, hey, as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.